Gosh, remember in the 2000s, so many licensed games released on multiple platforms, and most of the time they were all completely different from each other? Even games that were on consoles sometimes, they weren't even the same game, especially with the Pixar games. Well, there was actually one game, or a set of games I should say, that I managed to play all the different versions of it when I was little. That being Transformers the game. It's been a bit since I did my last video about the PS2 Transformers game, so why not cover another Transformer related thing? Seems like a pretty good time to do that. These sets of games are of course based on the first live action Transformer movie from 2007, which is peak cinema by the way. No kidding, I actually still really love this movie. There was the console game developed by Traveler's Tales, who you might know from a couple Sonic games, the LEGO series, and of course the first couple Pixar games. It was on the PS2, PS3, Wii, Xbox 360, and PC. Also, I know I mentioned this in the last Transformer video, but I just love the fact that on the PS2 there was a game just called Transformers, and then there is a game called Transformers the Game. I'm gonna bet a kid wanted one of those two games, but he accidentally got the other one instead. Then there was also the two DS versions, one for the Autobots and one for the Decepticons. These two were developed by Vicarious Visions, who nowadays you'd know them for the Crash Insane trilogy and Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 remakes, but back then they did a ton of handheld versions of licensed games. Finally, there was the PSP version developed by a studio called Savage Entertainment. I couldn't find much about this studio. They've mostly done handheld ports, including a PSP version of WALL-E. They also did a really obscure He-Man game, and they would come back to do the PSP version of Revenge of the Fallen. So yeah, 3, or 4 if you want to count the two DS games separately, different versions of Transformers the game. Well, let's go through each game and I'll tell you my history with each of them. Plus, also see if I can recommend any of them. We'll start with the one I played first, the console game. So since I was a big fan of the movie, one day I was at a friend's house and I saw they were playing this game. I think it was either the Wii or Xbox 360 version. I can't remember exactly which one it was. I remember seeing them play the first Decepticon chapter with Blackout, and it just looked so cool to me. It convinced me to get it next time I was at a GameStop, so one day when I went to one, I got it on the Wii and I played it so much. I didn't 100% it, and I don't think it was one of my most played Wii games, but I definitely played it a good chunk. I unfortunately lost my original copy, but then I got it on PS3, and then I lost that copy too, before finally getting it on PS2, and thankfully I still have this one. I have a lot of memories with this one in particular, but does it still hold up? In terms of which of the console versions I'm gonna look at, while I do still have it on the PS2, I'm actually gonna play it on the Xbox 360, though I did do one playthrough of the Wii version since it's the version I grew up with. Man, this opening cutscene is still awesome. This and War for Cybertron have got to be my favorite openings in any Transformer game. They go so hard. So as we start the game, we have the option between two campaigns, either the Autobots or Decepticons, and this was a really cool feature at the time. I know the Beast Wars games and the Japanese only PS2 game were technically the first Transformer game where you could choose between both sides, but this was really the first big game that would standardize that idea, that would pretty much carry on in almost all the Transformers games after this one. As for both campaigns, well, they both pretty much follow the story of the film, although with the Decepticons, it's more of a what-if type scenario since, well, they kind of lost in the film. Otherwise, with a couple of minor differences and the human stuff being really downplayed in this game, the stories in both campaigns is just the plot of the film. Although, I will say, it's really cool in the Autobots campaign. You get to fight Shockwave, who wasn't in the film. That's pretty sick. And his design is so cool. In terms of how everything looks, the actual pre-order cutscenes look pretty good. Although I do wish the Transformers actually move their mouths when they talk in the cutscenes. They all look like they're trying so hard to be ventriloquists. The actual voice acting though, it's okay. It's not great, but it's not awful. I think they do an okay enough job. I do feel some lines sound a bit wooden, especially from a few of the Decepticons, but I will say both Peter Cullen as Optimus and Frank Welker as Megatron, they do a fantastic job as always. Speaking of Frank Welker, this was his first comeback as Megatron since the 80s. Yeah, even before Transformers Prime, the first movie game was his official return to voicing Megatron. Just like how the 2007 Transformer movie was Peter Cullen's comeback as Optimus since the 80s. When talking about the in-game stuff, for an Xbox 360 game, it looks really good. All the Transformers look really nice, they captured the movie designs pretty well. The environments also look really good. Again, I wouldn't say this is one of the best looking games during the 7th gen, but I still think graphically it all holds up really well. The soundtrack is so good too. I love this game's OST. Just really epic music that pumps you up for whatever mission you're doing, especially the tracks that play during the city. Oh, so many bangers right there. So this is an open world adventure game of sorts. Like I said before the game starts up, you can pick between either the Autobots or Decepticon campaign. While both have some similarities to them, the missions you do for both, the places you go to with a couple of exceptions, and of course the characters you have are completely different from each other. For the Autobots, you have Bumblebee in both his classic and new Camaro version, Jazz, Ironhide, and finally Optimus Prime. For the Decepticons, you got Blackout, Scorponok, Barricade, Starscream, and of course Megatron himself. The controls overall, I think feel really good. I really like the weight each of the Transformers have. I like how characters like Bumblebee and Barricade are smaller, so they feel very light moving around. But then you get to the much bigger characters like Optimus and Megatron, and obviously they feel much heavier moving around. I just really dig that all the characters have that distinction from each other. This game nails transforming though, because you can transform whenever and wherever you want. It's great, and all the vehicles feel pretty good. Again, I dig that all the vehicles feel distinct from each other. It fits whichever character you're playing. Now, combat-wise, they all pretty much work the same. You have a melee attack and a projectile you could use during combat. Unfortunately, it's very basic. It's not very deep at all. All you have is a simple 3-hit combo, some objects you can pick up, and your long-range projectile, but that becomes useless against most enemies since like 80% of all enemies just shield immediately as soon as you try and shoot at them. But weirdly, despite all that, I still have fun with the combat. Like, it may not be deep, but it's pretty fun. I don't know, it's just really enjoyable destroying the Decepticon or Autobot drones. Plus, I really like the enemy drones you fight. Most of these are based on some of the existing drone figures from the 2007 toy line. Some, like the Swindles, Scrappers, and Dropkicks, they can be taken down with just your melee. However, then you get stuff like the Long Arms, the Dreadwings, or the Mixmasters that will require you to grab an object to throw at them. I wouldn't say any of the drones were hard, but again, it was really fun destroying these guys. Now, as for the missions themselves, well, each campaign has 5 main chapters with 4 missions for each of them, with the exception of the last one, which is just a boss fight. The mission variety is alright. It's really not that bad of a selection. Some just have you defeat a bunch of enemies, maybe blowing a couple things up, and of course the boss fights, which I will say are pretty fun. They provide a pretty good challenge and they have unique strategies to them. I dig that. The missions overall are fine. I found all of them to be really easy. I think the only one you might have trouble with is the Ironhide boss fight. But even then, as long as you stay away from him when the drones come in, you'll be okay. Each chapter also features a hub world. Both campaigns do share a couple of locations, like the suburbs at night and the city, but then the Autobots get the inside of the Hoover Dam and the suburbs in the daytime, while the Decepticons get Qatar and an airbase. If you were to ask me which of the 2 campaigns I preferred, I'd say the Autobots is the better of the 2. Well, yeah, the Decepticons I'd say were more fun to play as. The missions they had you do were honestly not that interesting, and I thought Qatar and the airbase were just not that interesting to travel through. With the Autobots, yeah, they get 2 hubs in the suburbs, but at least the missions you do with them are a lot more fun. Like, I'd rather play any of the Autobot missions than whatever Starscream had at the airbase. Plus, the Autobots had way better boss fights. Jazz fighting Blackout and Starscream is way more fun than just Blackout fighting Ironhide in this long, drawn-out fight. One thing I'm not a huge fan of though is you can't really switch between any of the Autobots or Decepticons when you're just exploring the hubs. Like, the missions I can't get Scorponok to fight Jazz, fine. But in the hubs, you should be able to use anyone, but no, after you beat the last 4 missions, you're stuck with the character from the last mission. Sure, there is a way to switch characters by basically replaying the mission with the character you want to be, beating it, then dying in the hub world so you can respawn as the character you want, but come on, that's so clunky to do. Just have a menu to select whoever you want. Also, it's kind of disappointing though that both campaigns are incredibly short. You can beat both campaigns in about 2, maybe 3 hours, I'd say. That's not to say there isn't anything you can do after you finish both stories. Once you beat a campaign, you unlock a bonus chapter on Cybertron with Optimus and Megatron. It's just an enemy gauntlet, but hey, it's kinda neat. Plus, I gotta say, I love the look of Cybertron for these bonus levels. It's so cool. Outside of that, in the hub worlds, there are 100 Energon cubes you can find. The more you find, the more challenges you can unlock. And the challenges are pretty decent, I'd say. You also have the faction symbols hidden around, these skill symbols you can do, and if you're playing the Xbox 360 version, there's some achievements you can earn. Although, an achievement for just transforming, man, achievements were so funny back then. For this video, I actually managed to 100% this entire game, and honestly, it wasn't that bad. It was pretty smooth. Plus, you get a bunch of bonus content, such as a few images of the 2007 toy line, stills from the movie, concept art, comic book covers, a few trailers, and even the intros for all 3 of the Unicron Trilogy shows. Oh yeah, and you also get some skins like the G1 colors for Starscream and Jazz, or even just playing as G1 Optimus and Megatron. That's really sick. Also, if you have either the Cybertron or Platinum Hits version of this game, you get a bonus DVD. It's basically all about the behind the scenes about this game, and hey, you even get a little sneak preview of the then upcoming Transformers Animated. If there was one thing that is probably the most talked about thing when regarding the Transformers game, it's what didn't make it in. If you just take a glance at the TCRF page for this game, oh man, you're gonna be reading a lot what didn't make it into the final game. This is a movie tie-in, so like most of them, they are rushed to meet the movie's deadline, so lots of stuff gets cut out because of that. Probably the most noteworthy thing is the cut exterior Hoover Dam stage, which, believe it or not, some people actually managed to restore it so it's fully playable. It's a lot of crazy stuff on there, so if you get the chance, read up on what didn't make it in. It's pretty fascinating stuff. So the question that's probably on your mind is, do I think this game holds up? In most ways, yeah, I still have a lot of fun with it. It definitely has a bunch of issues. For one, the length is just way too short. The Decepticons campaign has some pretty meh missions. The game slows down quite a bit during really intense fights. The combat, while it's fun, can get very mindless, and in general, there isn't a lot here if you're looking for a game with a lot more meat to its bones. But I still have a lot of fun with it. I love how the Transformers feel. Transforming feels great in general. The missions for the most part are pretty fun. Graphically, it still holds up really well. I enjoyed the combat. I really love exploring the hub worlds. The music is great. And I don't know, I still have a lot of fun with this one. If you're looking for something a bit deeper and you're really not a fan of Transformers, especially the movies, then yeah, I don't think I can recommend this game. I can see why someone would not like it. However, if you just want to play a game that's just fun, even if it's not very deep, and you're a Transformer fan, or at least are okay with the movies, then absolutely I'd recommend this one. It's a really fun time. In fact, if you can, I'd go for the PC version if possible. I know there's a whole big modding scene with that version. It's a little beyond the scope of this video for me to go into, but check it out. There's some really cool stuff people have made with this game. But, like I said at the beginning, I not only played the Xbox 360 version for this video, but I also decided to play the Wii version as well. it was the version I grew up with, so I wanted to give it a quick look in this video while we're still on the topic of the console game. Honestly, if we're talking graphically, it may not look as good as the 360 version, but man, for a Wii game, it still looks really good. I gotta commend them for porting this to lower gen systems. It still looks really good on the Wii. It's the exact same game, same levels, same objectives, everything that was in the 360 version is here. Well, aside from the achievements, of course. The big difference is the controls. Since this is a Wii game, you have motion controls in place of a few buttons. Now, I do like how you have more control of the reticle since you can use the pointer controls for it. That's fine. I don't really like how it also controls the camera. That's pretty clunky. It's probably my biggest problem with the controls. The camera in this version is just really messy sometimes. You use the nunchuck to pick up things, although you could also use a separate button for that, but combat is all done by swinging the Wii remote, and it doesn't feel that great. It works fine enough, but I just don't really like how it feels. I much prefer using a button for melee combat than swinging with motion controls. Otherwise, well, it's Transformers the game. This version is passable. It's perfectly playable, but just stick to any other version of the console game. The only reason to play this version is if you grew up with it like I did, or if it's the only console you had. Otherwise, just stick to any other version of the console game. Heck, even the PS2 version is still perfectly fine. Now for the DS versions. So yeah, a dual release for this one. Most Transformer games did this sort of thing on the DS, where you either have an Autobots or Decepticons version to pick between. In fact, I remember playing both Revenge of the Fallen DS games before picking up the first game's DS games. And I can't tell you how much I played both of these versions when I was little. I think I might have even played these more than the console game. Now, before I get into both games, these aren't like Pokemon where, oh, it's just the same game with some minor differences. No, it's not like that. Think of these like the Zelda Oracle games, where they may share some similarities, but story-wise and what you do in them, it's completely different. So let's finally get into both of these games. I'll start with the Autobot story first. You start the game as this rookie that just landed on Earth, and you're basically going through the events of the movie through the perspective of this new Autobot. What I really like about the Autobots and the Decepticons story, to jump ahead here, is how much they flesh out both sides in both of these games. That's not to say the console version didn't have any of this. They had a couple good lines here and there, especially like this little moment between Ironhide and Optimus.
Without another incident like Kyber 5. That hunk of rock was gonna blow up anyway.
But otherwise, it was kinda rare to see that sort of thing in the console version. Here though, we get a lot more of that type of stuff, especially from the Decepticon story, as you actually get to see how characters like Brawl or Blackout, who had like no lines in the movie and maybe like 1 or 2 lines in the console game, in the DS version, we actually see they have personalities. But to get back to the Autobots, I really dig it a lot. They even give Optimus a small arc in this game. It's basically just him realizing that he needs to also care about his little team and not just thinking about beating Megatron. It's not the most deep thing, but I greatly appreciate that they give Optimus a little bit of character development. Otherwise, the Autobot story is pretty simple, but it's the dialogue and how it puts you into the perspective of this rookie that really make me enjoy this story a lot. Then there is the Decepticon story, and oh, this is so good. You also start as sort of a newcomer to the Decepticons, being a protege of Starscream. The whole thing with the Decepticon story is you learning the ropes of being a true Decepticon, but more importantly, unraveling this little mystery that Starscream has been trying to keep his power as leader of the Decepticons by trying to stop Megatron from getting revived and keeping the Allspark to himself. It's so interesting that in the Decepticon story, the Autobots are just kind of a secondary threat. Heck, Optimus isn't even the final boss in this game. They're not as important of a threat as Starscream is. Also, yeah, these two games have full voice acting too. For DS games, that's gotta be really impressive. Plus, the actual voice acting is a lot better here. There's still a couple lines that feel a bit wooden, but I feel the actors here got to express their characters a lot better here than in the console version.
What makes you think Megatron is so much better a ruler than Starscream?
Because you know where you stand with Megatron. Starscream is the type that would kill you in your sleep. Megatron would have the ball bearings to do it to your face. Now let's move out.
Also, another thing that's pretty impressive, these are both fully 3D games. Yeah, these are fully open world games on the DS, with worlds that might even be bigger than even the console version's hubs. It's incredibly impressive that they managed to do this, and it still looks pretty nice. Now, you might be wondering, a 3D game on the DS controlled with a D-pad? That sounds kinda rough. But no, the game controls like a dream. Your character feels great to move around with, and while I would prefer to play this with an analog stick, I think the game handles well enough with a D-pad. In terms of moveset, aside from the shield, you have basically the exact same moveset as the console version. Well, until you level up. You see, in both versions of the game, you're gonna be in control of the rookie, and there's actually some RPG elements thrown in here. As you level up, your stats increase and you get some new moves. Not only that, but exploring the hub world and scanning certain vehicles, you'll find a bunch of forms your character can have. You can even change the color of the form you want. With this rookie, you basically can create your own Transformer OC, which is so cool. Now, it isn't as in-depth as something like Fall of Cybertron's character creator, but for a DS game, this is really awesome. And the forms aren't just cosmetic, they all feature slightly different weapons. You got a lot of options to choose from. Plus, the idea of scanning a form is really neat. Not every vehicle gives you a form, but for the most part, you'll find a lot that do. Now, the actual gameplay is more or less similar to the console version. You're thrown into a hub world, and you have the main story missions to do, and a few optional challenges here and there. I don't have a lot to say about the missions since they're about the same as what you do in the console version, but I feel here they provide a much better challenge. While I thought the missions in the console version were a little bit too easy, here, while I wouldn't say either game was hard, there will be a few missions that will challenge you, especially during the Decepticons game. You do also play as the other Transformers, not just the rookie. For the Autobots you get Optimus, Bumblebee, Jazz, Iron Knight, and Ratchet. Then for the Decepticons you get Barricade, Blackout, Brawl, Starscream, and Megatron. They all feel great, and it's really nice to play as characters like Ratchet and Brawl who weren't even playable in the console version. Plus, I love the fact that unlike the console version's weird way of doing it, you can just pick any Transformer you want and just roam around in the hub worlds. You got Tranquility, a casino strip, the Hoover Dam, and one exclusive hub for each game. The Autobots get the Arctic, while the Decepticons get Qatar. Oh yeah, there's also the multiplayer in Allspark Wars. I couldn't play either of these since I can't record multiplayer DS games and the Allspark Wars has been shut down for a while. The multiplayer was fun from what I remembered, just a bunch of maps where you could just fight your friend. And then as for Allspark Wars, this one was actually pretty interesting. I unfortunately never had the chance to play Allspark Wars when it came out, because I never really used my DS for online games that much. But basically, from what I've heard, it was an online mode where the players from either version of the game competed in online challenges in order to construct the Allspark for the respective side. This was also where you got some exclusive vehicles, but unfortunately, since the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection is shut down, there is no way to get these exclusive vehicles unless you hacked your game. So, while you can't do Allspark Wars, and it's very unlikely you'll be able to play wireless multiplayer with people nowadays, you still have two great single-player campaigns to look forward to. They're not long, in fact they are pretty short, but man, I love both of these games. I love the stories. They are just way more engaging than in the console version. Everything with the customizable OC you have have is really cool, the missions are fun, the music is really catchy, and for DS games, these are very impressive. I mean, how many fully open world 3D games on the DS can you name? These are great games. I don't even think you need to be a Transformer fan to enjoy these. Heck, you don't even need to like the movie designs. These games feel pretty distinct enough from the movies where they could just stand on their own. You don't even need to know anything about the movies themselves. I can definitely recommend both of them to everyone. They are both some of the most underrated games in the Nintendo DS's library. Give these two games a shot, you won't regret it. Now, for our last game for today, let's talk about the PSP version. This is definitely the one I have the least amount of experience with. I remember seeing one of my friends play it on their PSP a while ago, and I gave it a try for a bit, but that was pretty much it. I didn't really experience anything beyond like 10 minutes of gameplay. It wasn't until recently where I finally got myself a PSP alongside a few games, including this one. So, unlike the other versions of this game, this one is only one campaign where you'll basically be switching between the Autobots and Decepticons perspective, kinda like what some of the other future Transformer games would do. The PSP game, of course, follows the movie, but of all the versions of this game, this one is definitely the most interesting in terms of story. Because there's an entire big subplot revolving around some characters that weren't in the movie. So basically, when Megatron followed the Allspark to Earth, he was also apparently accompanied by a bunch of Decepticon drones. Shockwave, who for some reason has a completely different design from the console version, learns about this and seizing an opportunity to potentially overthrow Megatron, reactivates the drones for his own personal army. So not only do the Autobots have to stop Megatron from getting the Allspark, but also stop Shockwave's army. Eventually, Hound and Trailbreaker deactivate the drones, but then at the end of the game, Starscream and Shockwave have a fight on Cybertron to see who will be leader after Megatron was killed by the Allspark. This subplot is really cool. I mean, again, it's still largely the same plot as the movie, but I do appreciate them expanding the story a bit more. It helps that the dialogue is pretty entertaining too. I really like these cutscenes.
What do you mean Megatron's gone?
He said he needed power, and then he blasted through the wall, and then I don't know where he went.
You fool! How are we going to get him? Never mind, I found him. Now to keep up with him. My lord, stop!
I still think the DS games have the better character interactions overall, but the PSP version I'll say is better than the console version's character interactions. Even if some of the PSP cutscenes look a little bit goofy. The actual game though, man, this leaves a lot to be desired. So this isn't an open world game, it's instead a sort of linear third-person shooter. In each stage, your goal is pretty much just to get to the end of the stage, with maybe occasionally doing an objective here and there. Okay, we gotta talk about these controls because it's very clunky, and I'm gonna go through all of it. It's tank controls pretty much. You move the analog stick up to go forward, and then down to go backwards. You move the analog stick to left or right to change the direction you go. Triangle and X makes you look up and down. Square is your fire button, and also melee if you're close to an enemy. Circle is to pick up things. The R button is to strafe. L is to jump, and pressing both shoulder buttons at the same time have you transform. You also use the directional buttons, with down being to lock onto an enemy, up being your super move, left to pick up things, and right to cycle through your weapons. Does that control scheme sound intuitive? Because it really isn't. I did get used to it as the game went on, mostly because I am used to a lot of games with tank controls, but man, you could have made this control scheme a lot simpler. I know the PSP doesn't have a second analog stick, but I feel you could have done it in a way that was more intuitive. I mean, look at the DS games. Those controlled like a dream, and those were 3D open world games controlled with a D-pad. I will say, with the exception of the helicopter controls, which were horrible, the controls for the other vehicle modes felt pretty good. I didn't have any issues with them. The funniest thing though, despite the very clunky controls, this game was really easy. I'm not kidding. The enemies you fought were a pushover, and the level design is so linear, you're almost exclusively just going in the straight line. The only level I had some trouble with was the Cybertron stage, which was genuinely pretty hard, but that's also the final stage, so that makes sense. Otherwise, the enemies don't pose a challenge, the bosses were a joke, and you're really not doing much in these stages. There are some cool characters you play as, like Shockwave and Hound. Unfortunately, I couldn't record anything from the multiplayer. I don't even know what it's like, but if you played it, let me know how it was in the comments below. But back to the campaign. I don't know, this was just so boring to play through and also incredibly slow, especially for bigger characters like Optimus. Ugh, these levels could take forever to get through. There are some nice collectibles you can find that unlock some bonus material, and I do like that the PSP game allows you to pick between different weapons. That's really nice, but that doesn't change the fact that I find the gameplay as a whole just boring. Listen, I'm not trying to be like, oh, because it's not an open world game like the other versions, that makes it bad. No, it's fine to be different, and I think what this game was going for could have worked really well. Make the controls more intuitive, have the level design be more interesting, make it a bit more challenging. But instead, what we have here is a very slow and very boring game. I can't recommend this one. The only stuff I would say I really liked about it is the story, but you could just look up the cutscenes on YouTube. You don't even need to play this game. So, for our little verdict from best to worst, the ones I could recommend the most are the DS games. I think you'll have a great time with both games. Even if you're not a Transformer fan, play them. They are such great games for the DS. As for the console version, I still really enjoy this one. However, it definitely has a lot of flaws, and I don't think it's for everyone. If you're looking for a game with a bit more to it, then this game is probably not for you. But if you just want to play a game to just have fun with, even if it's not very deep and you like Transformers, then yeah, I'd recommend this one. It's a fun time. Finally, at the bottom is the PSP version. This is the only one I flat out can't recommend. Even for Transformer fans, it's so boring, and aside from the story, which again, you could just look up on YouTube, there's really not much here to enjoy about it. Definitely skip on this one. And that's it. That's all the versions of Transformers the game. Overall, a pretty interesting set of games. It was really fun looking through all of them and seeing their different takes on the same story. But what do you guys think of these games? Did you grow up with them? Let me know in the comments below. And let me know if you want me to cover other Transformer games in the future. I'd love to cover stuff like the other movie games and the Cybertron series. If you like this video, give it a like. And if you're new here to the channel, hit that subscribe button. I hope you all have an amazing day and take care. Bye!
Am I gonna die?